Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
All righty. Okay, so everyone, welcome. How are y'all doing today?
Good.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for staying after the service and coming once again to Unveiling Genesis. Last week, we talked about Noah, the story of Noah, and today we're going to look at the call and the fall of Abraham. I want to thank Olinka, especially because she and I met for like weeks planning out how this is going to go, because Genesis is a big book. So we looked at what's the best sort of narrative schema we should follow. And so she picked some wonderful stories. So thank you, Olinka.
You're welcome.
So today we're going to focus on chapters 12 and 13. And the questions I'm going to answer are basic. What is the call of Abraham, or what was the call of Abraham? And then what was the fall of Abraham? So what was the call of Abraham and what was the fall of Abraham? And this is very pivotal if you're going to understand Genesis. So what is the call of Abraham? Well, last week we looked at the story of Noah, who was called by God in a time when humanity was out of control. Remember, we talked about this cycle of things are out of control, then out of control, taking control, and then losing control. And it's this cycle that repeats itself from the story of Noah on to the end of Scripture. So we looked at the story of Noah last week, where things were out of control. Though most of humanity was corrupt in the story of Noah, Noah finds grace in the eyes of God, who saves him and his family from destruction by the flood. After the waters go down, you remember the story, Noah plants a vineyard, and then he makes some wine from the grapes. He harvests the grapes, makes some wine, and then he gets drunk. And then he wakes up the next day to learn that something terrible's happened. An unspeakable act has happened with his grandson, Canaan. We don't know what it is, but it's something so terrible that the author of Genesis doesn't mention it. And so we talked about this. And so Noah, in response, curses Canaan. Canaan, something happens while Noah is drunk. He wakes up, and it says when he learned what his youngest son, and son was a word that was for, it's like the sons of the sons of the Netherlands. It's the descendants or the peoples of that. So it's a general term. When it says when he learns what his son did, it's the grandson Canaan. And he learns what Canaan has done, and he curses Canaan and his descendants to be slaves of their uncle, of his uncles and their descendants. Remember, Noah has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan. And so when Noah curses Canaan, he says, you will be, and your descendants will be the slaves of your uncle Shem and Japheth and their descendants. Despite things, getting out of control, God uses Noah to get things under control, to take control again. And then what does Noah do? Noah throws it right out of control. So God uses Noah to take control, and then Noah loses control. And years later, humanity is right back to where it was before the flood. People are driven by sin, living in evil ways. And once again, things out of control. Another person finds grace in the eyes of God. His name is Abram. And he is from a place called Ur, which is a city in Mesopotamia or modern-day Iraq. The people of Ur, it's interesting, there were 2 people of Ur. They were the Sumerians and the Chaldeans. And they were descendants of Noah's son Shem. So this is interesting. So from Ham, the Hamitic line, Noah's sons, little history lesson for you. From Shem, comes the Semitic people, Semites, Shem, and that's where that term comes from Shem. From Ham comes mainly peoples of African descent. We come from Ham, and the Canaanites as well. And then from Japheth comes generally, we think, Europeans, Asians, perhaps, they are from those lines. But yeah. But anyway, so the Chaldeans and the Sumerians, they come from Shem, Noah's son, and their culture was very sophisticated. Many of the houses and the walls of Ur, their famous city, still stand. Thousands of years later, you can go in the house and it's still standing, a lot of it. And also part of their temple, which was called a ziggurat, is still standing. So it shows you how good their technology was. I mean, this is long before the Romans, long before the Greeks, and Ur is still standing, or parts of it are. Ur was the birthplace also of the oldest code of law. So the first code of law was in Ur, and it was called the Code of Ur-Nammu. And the culture of Ur was cosmopolitan and very modern for its time. The religion of this city was polytheistic, multiple gods, and sometimes they worshiped their kings as well. And this was the norm for the ancient world. The idea of there being one God this was not normal back then. Most cultures were polytheistic. And so the people of Ur, again, they worship their kings and their artists. Their art survives to this day. You can go to museums and you see art from Ur, and it's very beautiful, beautiful statues, very fine details. This was a sophisticated, modern culture for its time. This is the world that Abram is born into. We have this idea that he's born in a tent and he's living in the desert. He's a country boy. He's actually a city boy. If he lived today, he'd basically be from The Hague. And what we know is that he's a Chaldean. He's not Sumerian, he's a Chaldean. So the Sumerians found Ur, and then later the Chaldeans take it over. He's born during the Chaldean period. So he's a Chaldean. He, chances are, would have had many gods. The places he's living, there's many gods. He's grown up in a place with good laws. The first code of law is from there. So we think that we're the first with human rights. For that day, he had human rights. There was some form of equality there. He grows up in a place where there's many gods, there's good laws, and there's amazing technology for the time. He is in one of the safest and most prosperous places in the world. Then one day, God finds favor with him and tells him to leave it all behind. This is the crazy thing. He's in a city like The Hague. Safety, good laws, good education, technology, and multiple gods. And then he hears a voice out of nowhere that calls him and says, I want you to leave it all behind. God also tells Abram that there are no other gods. He says, everybody's wrong. There are no other gods. There's just one God, and that's me. Well, not me, but God. Yeah. And then he tells Abram, he says, all of this, he says, everything around you, it looks safe, but it's radical and foolish, and it's actually out of control. So if somebody came to you and was like, Den Haag is just a city out of control, you'd be like, what are you talking about? God tells Abram, he says, the city you're living in, it's actually out of control, like the rest of the world. God also tells, he says, leave this city with its security. And then God tells him something even more crazy. He says, now I want you to also, you, the Shemite, I want you to go into the wilderness where the Canaanites live. So it would be like telling somebody, I want you to leave the richest part of town, and as we say where I'm from, go live in the hood. And the worst part of the hood. It would be like God, basically God live among the Canaanites. And the Canaanites, remember, they're the descendants of Noah's grandson who was cursed. And unlike the Chaldeans, these were some rough and crazy people. They had no code of law like Ur. They had none. Their culture, it was sophisticated, but it was also very brutal. They sacrificed children, they encouraged murder, and they did immoral sexual acts. For a civilized Chaldean, this is the crazy thing, like Abram, to move among these people, it was suicide. And Abram's friends and family must have thought, are you crazy? You're telling us first there's one God? Okay, maybe. But you're going to leave this city with laws and with culture. You're going to leave Ur and go live among them crazy people out in the wilderness. What are you thinking? And he's heard a voice that says, again, I'm the one true God. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I'll show you. I will make you a great nation. So here's a promise. I'll make you a great nation, and you will be a blessing. Your name will be great. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So he's got this promise. And so imagine his relatives going, Abram, what are you thinking leaving here? What would make you want to leave this comfort and this security and prosperity? Well, I got a promise from God. You'd think that, is this a repeat of Noah? You've been drinking? Indeed, many people must have thought he was crazy. But Abram surprisingly leaves it all behind and does what God tells him. At that time, he was not living in Ur when he gets a call. He's living in another city called Haran, which is founded by the people of Ur. And it was very prosperous and safe. So he's just moved at this point. He's relocated, and at this time, for what we know, Haran is doing a little better than Ur. So Abram has just moved. He's just settled in. And then he gets this call from God. And the only family that joins him is his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot. These are the only people that seem to believe this promise, believe what he's talking about. And with them, this is crazy, he takes his servants and all his animals. Remember that servants and animals were living wealth. Money hasn't really been invented at this time. So your money is in your land, it's in wealth, or it's in servants, it's in animals. And so Abram takes all of this and goes off into the wilderness. And so Abram is a rich man. And he's going and he's leaving the city, the safety, to move to the hood. And this is the crazy part about it is, he's like someone who empties out their bank account, puts all their money in a suitcase, and then walks into a high crime area. In short, Abram is just asking to get robbed by the Canaanites. But for some reason, he defies logic and he follows God. With his wife and his nephew, he sets up camp in the wilderness. And then once he gets there, God appears and makes a promise again about the place where he's gone. He says, to your offspring, I will give this land. So Abram's moved to the hood. And he builds an altar. And then God says, I'm going to give the hood to your offspring. I'm going to give this land, wild, crazy Canaanites, to your offspring. The people who are cursed. Give the land of the Canaanites to your offspring. I'm going to give the land of the people who are cursed to your people. And this is, remember, he's from Shem. And the curse of Noah was that the Canaanites would serve Shem and Japheth and their descendants. So this is the curse actually playing out. At this point, also, Abram is 74 years old. So his decision to move looks even more stupid because of his age. He's an old man who has lived a long and good life, and the logical thing to do is sit back in his retirement. Some scholars or some people believe that he went to Haran. He left Ur, he went to Haran, and he was in retirement. And all of a sudden God calls him. And also his wife Sarah, she's 65 years old. So the idea, and they have no children. So the idea of having offspring at this point is also crazy. Nevertheless, Abram has faith and he builds an altar to God. He takes God at his word and believes that God will keep his promise. And so this is the call of Abram. It's wild, it's crazy. Here he is, he's in retirement, no kids, and so he can keep all, he's got all this wealth. And then he hears one day this mysterious voice says, I'm the one true God. Leave it all behind and go live in the wilderness with the wild, crazy Canaanites. Trade your villa, your retirement home for a tent in the desert. And he does it. It's crazy. This is the call of Abraham. And so now, moving on, what is the fall of Abraham? Well, when God called Abram, he sent him among the Canaanites. And he was once again, you see God taking control in the story, just like with Noah. He finds this person who's open to his grace, but even more than Noah, he finds a person open to his friendship. Remember, Abram, Scripture called him a friend of God. Noah's just a follower, a worshiper, but Abram is God's first friend among humanity. No one's been called that before. And what makes Abram so unique is that unlike Noah, he sees the deepest part of God's heart. And he communes with God in a way that's almost like the Garden of Eden. So you're starting to see Eden, elements of Eden pop up in the story of Abram. He's talking to God, one-on-one like a friend. There's no priest. There's no oracle. There's nothing between he and God. It's direct communication. And he speaks to the Lord with an openness and that's authentic and it's sometimes harsh. And he gives the Lord and he gives the Lord's understanding and he gives him trust with this confidence. Abram's friendship with God is so beautiful that God even gives he and his wife new names. They go from Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah. You know how you have good friends and you give them like nicknames? This is kind of what God is doing with them. The friendship is so good with God that God's like, I'm going to give y'all nicknames. You're Abraham and you're Sarah. God walks with them in the wilderness, visits with them, even eats with them at one point. And he shares his deepest plans and secrets with them in loving conversations. I encourage you, read Abram and see it not as this holy, wise, old patriarch, but a friend with the divine. It looks like all is finally, back in, it's going to stay in control this time. We're starting to see elements of Eden blossom again. We're seeing friendship with God. There's no more destruction. God's put a rainbow in the sky, promising not to destroy things again. It's beautiful. And then Abram builds an altar, and he's Abraham. And then after all of it, he messes up. Like Noah, he has a fall through something that seems small and insignificant, but it threatens to undo everything that God has done. See, the place where Noah built the altar, this is interesting. Abraham. It's a high point, Just imagine, he gets to the wilderness, and it's actually his highest point. He's at a place called Bethel. Bethel means the house of God. So he's in this holy place in the wilderness. And then after leaving this holy place, after leaving Bethel, he travels on to Egypt. There is a famine that's going throughout the land, and he can't go back home. God's like, you can't go back. You've left, you can't go back. You've sold the retirement house. Everybody thinks you're crazy. You can't go back. And so he goes to the safest place, which is in North Africa. Around this time, the Great Pyramids were already standing. Aliens did not build them. The Egyptians did. So when he gets there, the big pyramids that you see today, they're already standing. the Egyptians are from Ham. They're the Hamites. They're from Ham. The Egyptian civilization is already well on its way, very advanced. So when he's getting there, he's seeing the pyramids. And before registering, he tells Sarah something. It's shocking. He says, tell them that you are my sister. And she was his half sister. They had the same father. So he's right. Don't tell people you're my wife. Tell them you're my sister. This is technically true. Again, she was his half sister. But he does this to protect himself from people who might kill him. You have to understand, he's been living among the Canaanites. And the Canaanites, these are brutal people. If they like your husband or your wife, they will kill you and steal your spouse. So he's kind of been in survival mode. And I think at this point, it's safe to say, he's forgetting he's not in Canaan anymore. You're in Egypt. But so he goes, okay, so just so they don't kill me, and chances are they probably did this before, he goes, let's go to the same old tactic, just tell everybody you're my sister. Well, at this point, Sarah, 65, she's very beautiful, the scripture says. And again, stealing wives is common. And when the Pharaoh sees her, he falls in love with her. And he takes her to the palace. Well, instead of telling the truth and caring for his wife, Abraham exploits her. He uses Sarah to get gifts from the Pharaoh. He says, hey, Sarah, tell the Pharaoh I need extra camels. Or you need extra camels. Give me extra camels. He was, in essence, one of my professors, he was pimping his wife. Exploiting his wife to get privileges from the Pharaoh. And out of anger for his selfishness, God punishes Pharaoh's house. And when Abram gets questioned, he tells the Pharaoh, well, she really is my sister. I didn't lie. We have the same father. In addition to Noah, Abraham starts to act like Adam. You start to see the negative side of Adam. Remember, there's the friendship with God, walking with God, this positive element of Eden. Well, now you're starting to see the negative side. Remember when God asked, what have you done? Adam went, that woman you gave me did it. He didn't take care of Eve. He threw her out there to save himself. He exploited his wife. Abram is doing the same thing. Just like Adam. Again, he loses control, and it's worse than the fall of Noah. It's much worse. Abraham, he goes higher with God than anyone before him. And there's a saying, the higher you go, the steeper your fall is going to be. The harder your fall is going to be. And Abraham falls harder than anyone else. Nevertheless, he finds grace within the story. Pharaoh should have killed him. So give me my stuff back and kill him. But Pharaoh just says, you know what? Get out of here. Go. And Abraham goes and takes the gifts Pharaoh gave him. Pharaoh doesn't kill him. There's grace right there. And also, once out of Egypt, little ways, Abraham moves on. God speaks to him in chapter 13. And he says this, he says, look around where you are, to the north and to the south, to the east and to the west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. It makes you wonder, if the flight to Egypt was Abram's flight to Egypt, if that was an act of disobedience. God told him to go to Canaan and stay there and to depend on him. And then when stuff starts to get rough, he says, well, I can't go home, so I'll go to the nearest cosmopolitan place. I'll go to Egypt. And then perhaps he goes back and God's like, okay, now that you're back where I called you to be and where you should have stayed, look around where you are, from the north to the south, to the east to the west. All this land, Canaan, the hood, all this land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. His promise does not go away even after this nasty fall. And he does not say that Abraham, and I'll keep repeating this every session, God never says that things aren't good. Despite things getting out of control, God is still gracious, caring, and kind, and the creation is still good in his sight. So that's the end of the lesson. Any questions, comments? Okay, going once. Going twice.
You're completely clear.
Okay. Yeah.
This is the start of the story.
It's the start of the story. There is a second fall. So Abram is actually worse. Noah has one fall. And you see again the great unraveling. Again, it gets worse and worse. Adam and Eve have one fall, Noah has one fall, and then Abram has more than one. It actually gets worse.
Next time.
Next time, yeah. Alrighty, so with that, thank you for coming, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.